This is Raymond Hoffstetter. While many people in St. Louis have known him for decades, I only first met him in September 2021. I literally only spoke to this man for 5 minutes and knew I wanted to record him telling his life story. He is a legendary recorder and curator of St. Louis history with a legacy unlikely to be equaled and certainly could never be replicated. He was a cameraman for a local network affiliate in St. Louis for 44 years, and yet that is only half of his story. This man has crammed 5 lifetimes into one. The number of surviving World War II veterans is getting incredibly scarce in 2021, much less ones whose mind is still this sharp with memory recollection this good. Notice that the first 30 minutes or so of this 2-part interview is one take and uncut. I simply turned the camera on and captured this fantastic, on-the-spot, semi-improv reiteration. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate that this man took the time to allow little old nobody me to record this very special, unique and original, never previously seen or published extensive story about his life up to this point in this exclusive interview in his own words, and I am very honored and grateful for it. As little as I have known him and been in his company, I'm confident when I say Ray is a man of humility, gratitude, kindness, and genuine class, who gives me great inspiration as a filmmaking historical documentarian to which I aspire. This may be one of the most important recordings I ever make. I proudly present to you the life and times of Raymond Hoffstetter so far.
Well, my name is Raymond Hoffstetter. I just celebrated my 95th birthday. I never thought I'd be around this long, but God's keeping me here for some special reason, I figure. I'm born and raised in St. Louis, Southside Dutch, as they call this. I went to Gardenville Grade School, which is on the corner of Kings Highway and Gravois. And then I went to Cleveland High School. So I'd like to tell people I went to Gardenville, but it's closed. I went to Cleveland High School, and it's closed. And then I went to Washington University Night School. I better not tell them that because they'll close it, you know how things get to be. But I have an older brother, 2 years older than me, he's gone now, and a 5-year younger than me sister who's still around at 90. We grew up in a very loving family. Our father was a stagehand. He was third in a generation. So when I worked as a stagehand for a while, I was the 5th generation and 4th generation. But it was in show business the whole time. My dad worked when there was vaudeville shows. And I don't remember completely, but I remember going backstage at the Ambassador Theater where he was a stagehand. They had vaudeville shows, one movie and then some vaudeville acts. And I remember watching some of the actors entertainers going off and on the stage. And I was told, now I don't remember this, I think I was 3 at the time, but my mother was down there with my brother and I. My sister hadn't been born yet. And Eddie Peabody, who was a master of the banjo, was the headliner. And he saw me there and he wanted to take me and my brother on the stage. My brother didn't go, but he took me out and I supposedly stood next to him while he played some number and all. And I guess that was my first taste of show business, just being out there on the stage with Eddie Peabody. Anyway, I graduated from Cleveland High School in June of 1944. Now, we graduated 4 days after D-Day, and I had my older brother was already in the Army. He was over in England with the Air Force, the 8th Air Force. And I had several cousins who were drafted. And of course, back then in World War II days, it was everybody wanted to, what are you doing to help win the war? Everybody wanted to do a part. So I graduated on June the 10th, and my best friend and I, we wanted to join the Navy. We were both 17, so we had to get our parents' permission. Well, we were going to get, eventually we'd be drafted. So we went down and they signed us up. We both went to Jefferson Barracks for our physical. I passed it, but he flunked it because of his eyesight. He wore glasses. And anyway, I waited about a week or two, and that was right after I graduated. So a week's time, we went down and signed up. In about another week or two, we were on a train headed to Farragut, Idaho, where I took my boot camp training. 50 miles from the Canadian border, out in the middle of wilderness. It was a beautiful place, but it really got cold every time when winter came around. I guess I had some knowledge of maps. I was always checking maps on where the war fronts were and who was advancing and whatnot, and I recognized and made a collection of all the flags of the United Nations back then, and I would display them out on our living room, on our porch in front, which my mother didn't care for. But anyway, I was assigned to a school called for quartermasters. Quartermaster in the Army is supplies. Quartermaster in the Navy is navigation and signaling. And I was sent to Gulfport, Mississippi, probably because of my knowledge of flags and maps. Of course, there would be charts in the Navy. And I graduated down there. I wanted to, they gave you a choice. If you were in the top 10 of the class, they said you would be able to probably choose which kind of a vessel you'd like to serve on. Well, I had always been fascinated as a child when these huge airships, the dirigibles that the Navy had, would fly over. There was the Akron, the Los Angeles, and Shenandoah. There was one other one, I can't think of the name now, but I was always fascinated by them. So my desire was to get in what they called LTA, which was lighter than air. It's like the blimps that you see over football games and baseball games. I like to do it because I'd be flying. The second thing, I'd be stationed along the east coast of the United States or the Caribbean islands. You go out in the morning, as soon as it got light, you'd go out and get check for submarines. And as it got dark, before it got too dark, you had to make your way back to the base. So I said, I'm sleeping in my nice, comfortable bed. I'm working during the day, and I've got a nice bed to come back to. The problem was that I graduated. I was in the top 10, and the officer said, nobody wants to be in those big, slow targets up there. You'll probably, I'm surely get it. Well, I didn't get it, only on the grounds that our class graduated on May the 14th. Germany surrendered on May the 8th, so there was no need for checking for German submarines. So I was assigned to a destroyer, which was, I'll tell you, not in my top 20 choices if I'd have been given that many. I went to Shoemaker, California, where that's where I got, where the assignment was to go down to San Pedro Harbor. The Mustang was a destroyer that was, the keel was laid in 1937, so it was one of the older ones. And it had gone through every practical battle out in the Pacific, because they were there when the war started. And they had received all kinds of battle stars and whatnot. And of course, I was the greenhorn going aboard. And they had just come back from Okinawa, where they had taken off all the torpedo tubes. And back in those days, the destroyers, which were fast and very mobile, they had torpedo tubes. They could rush in and real quick launch a torpedo and get out of the way as fast as they could. Well, there were no more surface vessels. There were very few surface vessels that Japan had. So they were taking all that off and putting on anti-aircraft guns that the Japanese kamikaze suicide planes were doing all the destruction. Well, I guess the Navy Department had figured that ship, the Mustin, the DD-413, had seen so much action that they needed a rest. So we were sent up to the Aleutian Islands, where the military was stockpiling military equipment on some of the Aleutian Islands in preparation for the invasion of Japan. We got up there in August, and we were issued foul weather gear because the weather changed so rapidly and quickly. One day it's in the upper 60s, and the next day it's 20 degrees. But we were up there and never sighted a Japanese ship, submarine, or plane. But we escorted vessels in until they hit the dock, and I started unloading. And while we were up there, we got word that the United States Air Force had dropped a big bomb on Japan. Of course, we didn't know exactly what they were talking about, a big bomb. And 3 days later, another one was dropped. And then there was rumors that the Japanese were going to surrender or wanted to. And when the word came officially, the old timers on the ship who had been through everything were just running around, slapping each other on the back, saying we made it. Well, immediately we got orders to go down to Japan and be part of the occupation fleet. And we steamed into the harbor at Okinawa of Aminato. It's in the northern island, a big island, the northern one. And it was a general quarters because we didn't know whether the Japanese, did they surrender? Were there going to be some holdouts or suicide people coming out with boats with loaded bombs or guns or what? But anyway, there was no, for 2 or 3 days, we just steamed in order. We never sat still just to make sure we'd be a moving target. But about 10 days later, in came a transport with American troops who went ashore, and we could secure, and we just did regular routine duties. A couple of trips to Tokyo Bay to pick up what they called military mail. I had top secret clearance to be a courier and carrier of it, not to read it. So I was sent ashore to pick up the special mail, not the commercial mail. This was the military mail. And that was the only time I got down into Japan. It was a beautiful country up there up in Aminato. But it's neat and clean. Probably didn't see too much war damage out in the woods or around those cities. But the little Japanese kids used to come running down to the beach and wave at you like that. I did get ashore. The Navy has what they call beach parties. You cannot drink on board a Navy vessel. They had beer for the crew, but only when you went ashore some places. We had beach parties, and you'd go in and they'd have a 2-bottle limit of room temperature beer, and I guess the cook made hot dogs, and that was about it. So I brought home a couple of souvenirs. I took out of the Navy barracks that was all abandoned, had been shot up quite a bit too, and Japanese rifle, bayonet, and helmet, a mounted gun sight, things like that I shipped home. And they're just wall hangers now. I've never had a desire to use them for anything other than to just be decoration. Well, we were there in Japan until late November, when we were ordered back to the United States. The ship made it back. We went through a terrible storm. I don't know, it was not a typhoon, but it was close to the edge of one. And for 3 days, we couldn't, all you had to drink was water and crackers and cheese and cold sausage, because the seas were so rough they couldn't cook. and couldn't even make coffee because it would be spilling all over. Anyway, we then made it back to the States, and half the crew got liberty, and I was on the second half, and we were supposed to go to Philadelphia to have the ship decommissioned, mothballed. Well, when I left the ship for my 15-day leave, when I got back, the orders had been changed. We were going to go out to Pearl Harbor, and the ship was going to be mothballed out there. And I'll tell you, that is a beautiful island out there. I've been out there 3 times now. The first time was when the Navy sent me. The second time I was working for a television station in a news department, and they sent me out there. And the third time I went, I had to pay for my way myself. It's kind of expensive. But anyway, we went out there, and we went up into this little bay area with 3 sister ships. They're identical to us, to the Mustin. And we started to take everything off, to strip it down so that it could be sealed up. And it was just about done. We were living in the barracks because there was no place to sleep on board. We were eating our meals out of a mess hall because there were cooks had nothing to use. And a typical, I guess, military intelligence is it says we got the word, put everything back. So we had to go back and find this and find that and put it back in from the storehouses that it went. It was going to be made seaworthy so it could take part at the Bikini Atoll of what was called Operation Crossroads. The Navy wanted to test an atomic bomb, how it would do with Navy vessels. Now, until then, there had only been 3 bombs. One was the one at Alamogordo, the test one. The second one was at Hiroshima, and the third one was at Nagasaki. So the tests were going to take place in August, but the ship was going to have to leave by June. And I remember the captain said, you got points, you can probably get out in June, and unless you want to volunteer to go along. Well, it's to say you saw an atomic bomb back then would have been something, because there was no photographs that we saw. But my brother was out, my friends were all out, and I said I would just as soon be able to go home. Plus the fact if I'd volunteered to go, or if I had to go because they couldn't get a replacement, I wouldn't be getting, the tests were in August, and I wouldn't be getting back to the States until maybe September, and not home until maybe September, October, which means that everybody else would have been home about 4 or 5 months ahead of me. So they found a replacement for me and another seaman on board the ship. So we got off, and the very next day the ship sailed out. I remember I went down to the dock and waved goodbye to the guys as they were leaving. And I got back home, was released to inactive duty, and I didn't know exactly what to do with my life at the time. I had worked as a 16-year-old stagehand out at the Muni Opera doing dirty work out, tearing old canvas off and taking nails out of boards and hinges and screws and things like that. So my dad said, they need help out there yet. So I said, well, until I make up my mind, that's what I'll do. So I went out there, and I was an assistant to the carpenters, and I was building sets and helping the painters move the stuff around in the big painting dock that they had. And I still couldn't decide exactly what I wanted to do. There was the GI Bill that my friends were already taking advantage of. And I think that GI Bill was one of the greatest things that this country's ever done. Can you imagine dumping about 16 million men and women on the open market when all of the manufacturing jobs hadn't come back yet? They converted back from military to civilian. It still was a long way in the future to have it all back the way it was. So anyway, I said, well, I'll just keep working until I'll make some money. Well, it so happened that I was sitting in a union hall waiting for a call to get some work done, and I was asked to go down to Channel 5 down on Olive Street Sunday at 4 o'clock. And he said, they need help. The guy, the stagehand that was working there needs help on Sunday nights and all day Monday. Well, I walked into that studio Sunday and I was so fascinated by all the work I did. And Monday was really a revelation to me of what television was. A brand new thing. There's no books, no training, no schooling for it. You just kind of improvise what you were doing. And I said, boy, this is for me. That was in February of 1948. And until May, I worked just Sundays 4 hours, Mondays 8 hours, supplementing with a couple of jobs elsewhere in between. When I was called in and asked if I would like to accept the job as a permanent one, which naturally I went dancing out of the room. I certainly did. And that was in May of 1948. And I was there and I retired in 1992. So it's like 44 years that I had spent there. I first worked in the studio as a stagehand. Then I worked at there were a lot of big shows we did there. Being live, you made a mistake, you just covered it up as best you could and kept going. It was really different than it is today, where everything is mostly tape recorded and played back. But it was really fun and enjoyment with different shows and the people I met. Movie stars would come in town and actors from the Broadway shows, entertainers and comedians. And then the live shows were kind of dying out. We had a few till finally almost the only live shows was the news and a couple other ones. And the news department was expanding. They had a news crew, a film crew, a cameraman, sound man, and a light man. And I heard that I bumped into this good friend of mine who was working with the news crew and said they're going to hire another thing to be a sound man or a light man. And he said, I can't think of who I'd like to ask that would work and fit in here well. And I said, I know somebody. I said, it would be me. So he said, you'd give up 18 years seniority? I said, yeah. So the next day the news director says, we don't know when it's going to be, but we will be the one. And so I had to wait quite a few months till I was assigned to a film crew. And it was really fascinating work, unbelievable to me what I had stumbled onto. And took me all the years. I eventually became a cameraman with film, and then a cameraman with videotape, and I did videotape editing. And then the station had its own, didn't have its own publicity department. They were signing it out to different companies. They decided they're going to have their own public relations, creative services department. And the fellow in charge asked me, would he come up and be the cameraman and editor for the department, which I gladly accepted. And then I got into what they call special programming. I didn't do a lot of news. I did it at times, but most of it now was all doing special feature shows and things we did. And you could be more creative than just doing the hard news, but it was a fascinating career. Of all the people, I've met presidents, governors, movie stars, sports heroes, and things like that I never would have had a chance to do. I've been a baseball nut all my life, the Brownies when they were here, and then the Cardinals. And with my position as a cameraman working at some of the ball games, I got some autographs. Now, you're not supposed to ask for autographs, but I just started a book. My grandmother sent me a book called My Greatest Day in Baseball while I was in the military. And I went around, read the book several times, of course. It's all the big stars from the 30s and early 40s, if it was that. And I started getting autographs of all the ball players that came in to St. Louis, whether they came to the studio or I was down on the field. Anyway, I filled up the book, and as of now, I got about 105 different autographs. About 50 of them are in the Hall of Fame. And it's my son wants to be sure and get that as in the will, that be sure he gets that thing. It's been valued at anywhere from $300 to several $1,000 because of all the names that are in there of people who are no longer around. But it's just, I get it out once in a while. It's in a safe deposit box. I get it out once in a while and read it and look at the different autographs I've got. Things like that. I would have never had a chance to get doing ordinary work someplace without being in the news. And then when I retired in 1992, I guess somebody said, what was the highlight of your career? The highlight to me was that, this is not the highlight, but I was part of a crew, the producer, Gary Furlow, and Dick Ford was the reporter. We flew over to Arabia as guests of the United States Army Air Force. We were only there 2 days, 44 hours to be total, which we didn't sleep. This was in Operation Desert Shield before the fighting started. And anyway, we were there just 2 days interviewing people from the St. Louis or from Missouri or doing anything of interest or what was going on over there. And one of the persons that came up to us was a naval officer from Kirkwood. Kevin Ondal was his name. And he was a combat photographer. And he said he had been out on all of the ships. He's been up to the front, every place where we couldn't go. And so he made a great interview. And he said, told us that the U.S. Missouri was over there during the fighting, that it was going to take part in the 50th year commemoration of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. That would be on December the 7th, 50 years later, 1991. And he says, sometimes they take civilians along and news people, but you usually don't go on long trips like that, maybe a day. So we got back and the producer went after the Navy Department and the congressmen and senators, and he worked from the January of 1991 until finally November. We got word that it's up to the from the chief of naval operations sent word down that if the captain of the ship doesn't mind us being there, it's okay with him. Well, the captain of the ship happened to be a baseball Cardinal fan, and that was all it took. So the highlight of my career was boarding that mighty battleship out in Pearl Harbor, or not out in San Pedro Harbor, right off of Los Angeles, sailing for 5 days out to Pearl Harbor. I said, I wish it would have taken 5 weeks because it brought back so many memories. In fact, we were leaving at 8 o'clock in the morning, and the officers over the loudspeaker, there were some civilians also on the board from two who had served on the Missouri at the time of the surrender. They had little cards that showed that they were there. A naval historian from Annapolis for the Navy was there. And anyway, they said all civilians report to the wardroom for just whatever they had in mind. So what it was they wanted us to sign papers that we would not hold the Navy responsible for anything that happened to us. I was wondering if you did refuse to sign, would they throw you overboard or what they would do? But of course, we all signed it. And the first question the guy asked me my name, and he's filling the paper. And he asked me what was my Social Security number. And I said 338-9062. It dawned on me that was not my Social Security, that was my Navy number that I hadn't used in 40 years. And just being aboard that ship, it came back to me automatically. But it was really a thrill and a great memories just sailing out on that big ship, because a battleship goes through the waves. The ship I was on went over the waves during the war. So anyway, that was my highlight of my career. I retired, so my wife and I could travel, and I was gone just about a year when I got a call from the gentleman that ran the archives. And what he wanted to know was, could I come down and help him out? That transferring the film that they wanted to save, which was, that would deteriorate, lose its color and everything. They were transferring it at that time over to videotape. Now it gets on the disc and finally right into the system. Could I come down and do it? So they worked out a deal where I would work whenever he got enough film cans ready for me to use. It took about eight cans. That's about 3,200 feet of film to be cleaned and cemented together with leader in between, put it on the projector, feed it into the system, and you had to be standing by because some of the older splices were coming apart or the film would jam. So you had to be right there next to it, and because you didn't want to damage the film anymore, that it could be happening. And I really enjoyed that because in time I got to see some of the film that I shot, that I was the cameraman on or the sound man on. And it was really nice. And I did that. They said, well, it would take about maybe 18 months to 2 years. And that was in 1992. So they were buying people out when they were reducing staff. And so I kid people that 18 years later, I took early retirement at the age of 89, what I was at that time. But it was really fun and enjoyable doing. I could really wish I could, in a way, I'm glad that they're saving things like that, because once it's gone, it's gone. And you can get this into the system. And it's been a valuable resources, and for not only for the station Channel 5, but for historians every place where they can do it. So it's been a long, full life. I've really enjoyed it. And I've been a historian all my life. When I was in grade school and I liked to read history books, I'm a member of the St. Louis Civil War Roundtable since 1964. A history nut, as my wife called it. My kids complained about trampling over battlefields. How many more cannons are we going to look at? I'm also a volunteer at the National Park Service's Grants Whitehaven, down on the Grants Road here, right across from Grants Farm. I'm a receptionist there, and what do they call it, the interpreter, and knowing some of the history of the place and of Grant. And then my wife, when they wanted to save old Sappington House here, and Thomas Sappington House, she was part of the early group that got together to work and save it. And she said, you know what you're going to do when you retire? And I said, yeah, I'm going to be a volunteer up at Sappington House, right? Because you'd never argue with your wife. So I got to be on the board. I used my training and talent to make a 19-minute video of a tour of the house for people who cannot climb the stairs that are not the most roundabout or narrowest stairs going up. And we showed off to people who have disabilities in the library, and it was fun doing it. I got to produce it, write it, and edit it, shoot it. And my boss was, I want to see that. When I asked his permission to use company equipment. He said, oh, of course. And I just want to see it when it's done. And when he looked at it, he says, you're going to blow their socks off from what they expect it to be like. So it has been really a pleasure to be able to get in places like this. People have asked me, how did you get there? And I always said, luck, I guess. I was in the right place at the right time. And my boss said, yeah, always added, but you had the right attitude. That you wanted to. I remember when we used to keep a log of when we went out to shoot stories, and I'd do 8, 9 a day. Nowadays, I think if they do 2 or 3, they think they're doing something. I'd do 8 or 9 stories in a day, turning the film in, and the video, and then later the videotape. Whereas the other cameramen, they were all good cameramen. I'm not going to point, but they weren't as, I guess, what do you want to call it, gung-ho, or didn't hustle the way I did. My favorite ball player was Enos Slaughter, because he hustled every play. He ran when they gave him a walk, he'd run the first. when the inning was over, he'd run in from the outfield. He was always active and taking part in something. And I was very fortunate to work with some very good and great people. All of my thing. I think I'm running out of something here. I could be anything more about my childhood or. Well, besides the blimp, I've been in helicopters, shooting out of helicopters. I've been in racing boats on the Mississippi. I've been in with the camera. I've been in racing cars over at the track, running around over there with that. I said I've been just about every place you could think of. I was not the cameraman, I was the soundman, but when we went up in the arch before it was completely finished, and it was really something riding up that arch, climbing the last part of the stairs because they didn't have the gondolas in at the time. And you're at the beginning of history, things like that. You're part of it. Getting yourself involved in it. I'm trying to think of what else I could have done. I don't know. I'll think of them tomorrow night or tonight. Oh. I meet with a group of retirees from Channel 5. We have lunch together once a month. And somebody said, you ought to write a book. Well, like I said, I started writing about my life for the minister who would get a chance to say in my memorial services that this was, about Ray. And I got to writing, and I finally, my doctor said, keep your mind sharp. Keep thinking back about those things. Those are great things to use. And I think at 95, I've got a fairly decent memory of what's happened in my life, and it helps doing that. And I started writing this thing I started from my childhood all the way up to when I stopped about 5 years ago. Well, I probably could have a supplement since then. But it's amazing as to what you've done in your life. And maybe I was fortunate enough to be in a place like this. The head of the St. Louis Broadcasters Hall of Fame heard about it, and he said that, could I get a copy of a lot of it's personal thing, but I made copies of anything I did in television and gave it to him so he can have it to use. Anything from when I first started, the day I walked in until I retired. And it's just been great to be able to do that. In fact, my name for the book was called Keep Smiling at the Camera Until the Red Light Goes Out. In the early days of television, the announcer was live. He'd be standing in front of a microphone, and the camera had red lights on it, which meant that camera was on. And so as long as that camera's on you, don't turn away or move, because you are the subject. And I think that's my philosophy of life. Keep smiling at the camera until the red lights go off. And as long as I can, I'm going to keep smiling at the camera. God, who doesn't like to talk about themselves? In fact, I've given talks about Grant when I was over there, and I'm the Speakers Bureau for Thomas Sappington House. I am the speaker, and I've been out. And it also, I had Karen Foss come down and ask her to come out. She's grateful, a great, beautiful lady too. Come down and talk to my wife's women's club. And then after she got done, she said, you ought to listen to Ray. He's got some stories too. So they said, oh, Ray, could you say something? So yeah, not then, but they set me up for the next meeting or so. So I told them about my time in television. And one of the women there was from Sappington House here. And she said, would you mind doing that for our fundraiser? And they used the old Mark Twain Theater, Two Hearts Banquet at the time it was. And they sold tickets for it. They had almost 400 people showed up. I was amazed at that. I thought it'd be about 30 or 40 people. And they made, I don't know, several $1,000s of people coming in to hear me talk about television. I didn't have any things to show, slides and stuff like that, but just my voice alone. And from that, I had more people come up. Can you come to our group and talk? And the red light went out on that one. So I've been doing that. I've gone around the Rotary Club. I used to show some videotapes that I've got of little bits of things that we at the end of each show was called Midday AM. Not a light. Oh, it's not going blinking as much. Anyway, at the Midday AM, they had a thing when the credits rolled by. Well, they didn't know what to put up, so they would send out this other cameraman and I to shoot pictures of something, fall leaves, kids playing in the snow or something like that. And I got to go out and shoot that stuff and put music to it, and they would run it at the end of the show. And there was a couple of them. One of them I did that it was nominated for an award. People going up and down the steps down at the arch. Everybody uses the steps a different way, and I put it to music. And I got a commendation from the owner of the station, from Natus people. They put it just got an award, nothing national, but it was you're creative. And I like that as well as doing hard news, but that was more when you're on your own to go out and shoot us something, shot kids playing in a playground, put circus music to it, worked out perfectly, things like that. It really helped. I enjoyed that so much. Oh, and I've got all those things. I've saved most of them, and I would show that at different club meetings and whatnot. Worked. I got. In fact, I used to go. I've done it, showed it at my church, and the other church, and different places of all the different things I've been on. When I was on the USS Missouri, I showed that. They made a show out of it. I didn't get to edit it because I had other assignments, but they put that together, and that was. I showed that and different things. We did a thing on the Arch on its 25th anniversary, for which we won an award, and got not honorable, but I was mentioned as the photographer in that doing that thing. The silver anniversary was called the silver anniversary of the Arch. Now it's 50 years old, but it was really fun doing that too, and enjoyable. I liked that so much. I did like it. What was better than doing the news, where you're the creative person, and and Dick Ford was the announcer on that and on a lot of things, and he'd go in and say, Ray, this is what we need, go ahead, and he knew, and I'd tell him what I shot, so the editor, if I wasn't editing it, knew what was there. So you got to have something, some video to cover it. This is, a photographer goes to a sporting event and he captures an instant. But when you got videotape or film, you got to capture the action that's going on. And it was really fun doing all of those things. I had a fellow who was the head of my department. He was great to work with. He took a job with Disney. That's how good he came back with all kinds of Emmy. Every time they had given an Emmy award in St. Louis, he'd get 4, 5, 6, 7 of them. And I remember this one time, I got nominated. I've been nominated, I guess, about 3 or 4 times. Never won, because they usually narrow it down to 5 people, and then you're one of the 5, but which one you don't know till that night when they announce it. And he won about, I'll bet 6 different ones there. We had a special show we did in which it got one for writing, for what is it? The actor, the story, and about 5 different ones in there. And he got producer and all that, and then that was just him. And then we got about 4 other people who were producing spots, and they won Emmys as well. And because I would think I was the only one. I don't think I know I was not the only one I was the only one who didn't win an Emmy that night in our department, So anyway, I was in the room early in the morning. Every morning at 9 o'clock we'd have a get together. Well, who's going to do what? Who's going to use the cameraman? Who's going to use the editing and that? So I was in at 8 o'clock, and I'm working in the other room, and this one producer comes in and starts talking to me about the craziest stuff. What is he talking about? Why aren't you worried about this and that? So finally she said, well, I guess we better go in now. We're in a meeting. So I get in there, and they all got their Emmys with them. And the fellow's name was Don Wells. And he said, now we all won Emmys and that. And he says, if it hadn't been for Ray, none of us would have, he contributed so much to all of us. That's why we got these things. And Ray, I want you to have this Emmy. And he gave me one of his. Now that meant more to me, getting that from my people I work with, than if some television station judging our KSD's things gave me an award for something, because I said they knew me. And I got that at home, and I've treasured that as much as anything I can that I took out of there, to have somebody like that. And then my second boss, he came in, and he was really, in fact, we got along so well, he took a job for NBC in Chicago, which was a bigger market, more money and prestige. When I retired, he came down to be at my retirement party, went back the next day. So he said, I wouldn't miss this for the world. So then we got another one in there that was not the best. He tried to change around things too much. I would have, if I'd have stayed, I would have been doing just commercial work, not, what do they call it, special programming that we were doing, And so that was not the reason, but it sure added to it. And 14 months after they hired him, they fired him because six people left the department. He just was not cut into it. He had a friend in Denver. I don't want to do it too much to here, but he would send in the tape of the voice track for the commercials that we were doing and the spots that we were doing. And we had a guy who was really good at it. He would do it in his home and send the track down. And he would say, this is take one. And then he started to do, oh, wait a minute, this is take two. So when you were listening to it, you'd say, I'd like take three the best, go back, we'll use that. Well, this guy send this tape in, and he'd be going off like, well, now the weather in St. Louis is up. The weather in St. Louis is going to be and you never knew where it was going to be on the tape. And he tried to tell him to do pause, name it, so we could, because it took forever trying to find which was the one that you were mentioning about the sound there. Well, well, to go back to one thing before that was in film, what they did is you bring in say 100 feet of it, and they only used maybe 20 feet of it. The rest of it was all thrown away. So the only part that they saved out of that was what they used on the air. And there's a couple of stories I was on that I wish I had been able to make copy. You couldn't make copies of film where we were. It can be done, but we didn't do it. Was that some other station wanted it. So we'd ship off what we had, and we didn't have it left over. They didn't make non-videotape. You could make a copy for them. And when I went back and working in the archives, some of the stuff we got, well, a lot of it at the beginning was lawyers asking for, you have videotape of this or that, whatever you got. And of course the station would make the decision. It was not for the archivist or myself to do that. And they would charge them so much. I don't know whether they charged them by the minute or by the foot or whatever it was that they were going to do. And finally, we were getting calls from television stations calling the archives from all over the country. They were calling in. We understand, like, when they're building the arch, what have you got on the arch that we can use? And then what have you got on the bridge that they're building? Or the mayor did this or that, your new football stadium or players. And they would call in and ask for it. And of course, we had it in the archives. And we'd tell the news director about it. He was the one who made the decision whether they were going to sell it or not a copy of it. So we were making copies and giving it to him, and he was shipping it off. And the station was making some money out of it, I'm sure, because they weren't doing it for free. And finally, when the new owners in there came in, And they said, we're not going to do that anymore because it's aiding the competition. Even if the competition is a station in Spokane, Washington, where don't never have anything to do with it. And there was kind of a recession that came along in the late, early 20s, 2000s. And the company somebody must have been looking through the books and found out how much the prior owner was making, sending out copies of these news stories or would feature pieces or anything, the history of the Eads Bridge, the arch, grants for anything they could think of. They were making money on that. So they changed over completely by hiring a guy who would in charge of that, so that he would come to us and said, it's been approved. We want to dig out what you can on this and put it on. We used to put it on beta tapes and then on disc, and I don't know.
No irony was lost on me that the second camera quit right at the point he was about to list the current state of the art media. Stay tuned to see the life and times of Raymond Hoffstetter so far, part 2, only on the Dozenspeed channel. And by stay tuned, I mean you will probably have to, at minimum, click this box being displayed right now. Thank you for watching.